Wonder if anybody's going to come. Hey, Big Mama. Hey, whisper to me. Just wondering. You guys going to listen? I appreciate it. Now, since you two are the first ones here, do you want, these silly, spooky stories? Or do you want reminisce? Either or. I don't care. I guess I should go with spooky since I said spooky, right? Wonder if Davida, let's see. She's not on. And I know she has to read tomorrow. She has to work tomorrow. Okay, spooky it is. They're kind of dumb, but I don't know. Spooky Indiana. Tales of hauntings, strange happenings, and other local lore. Hey, Steph. How you doing? Just going to read a few stories. Hey, Jenny D1. You're watching the movie, aren't you, Jenny? Okay. Let's see where we were. Wonder where Alicia Biso is. Okay. Dave's supposed to have turned the TV down. Hey, y'all's pals. Okay, we're going to read The Chain from Orange County. All these stories supposedly happened in Indiana. Hey, Hurricane Holly. All right. TV's so freaking loud, nobody will be able to fall asleep, probably. Sorry, guys. He thinks he has it down low. Hi, Billy Jones. The Chain. I was visiting my cousin's farm in the spring of 1935 while I conducted some business in a nearby town. At the dinner table the first evening, I mentioned my intention to visit Bonds Chapel Cemetery the next day to pay my respects at the grave of my great aunt. Hi, Painted Black. Mother spoke of her fondly, I told my cousin Jonathan. She asked me to place flowers on Great Aunt Celia's grave while I was visiting here. Jonathan looked grim. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Robert, he said. I have heard some strange stories about Bonds Chapel Cemetery. I couldn't restrain my smirk. Jonathan and his wife, Frances, were spiritualists and fond of table turning, seances, and rot like that. I should have known better than to mention my plan to visit the graveyard. Frances leaned toward me across the table and said earnestly, "The ghost of a logger haunts the cemetery." She studied the look of disbelief on my face and nodded solemnly. It's true. According to the story, a logger came home from work one evening and found his wife with another man. In a fit of rage, he strangled her with his logging chain and hid the body. And then he claimed she ran away with her lover. Hey, Davida. I just messaged ya. But the dying wife put a curse on her murderous husband, and her vengeance followed swiftly. Okay, that's why you're here. Awesome. A few days after the murder, a chain broke loose from a timber wagon on which the logger was working. It came whipping through the air and snapped the man's neck. They say it was the very same logging chain he used to kill his wife. Jonathan took up the tale from his place at the end of the table. The logger was buried in Bond's Chapel Cemetery, and a year to the day after his death, a chain began forming on his tombstone. Year after year, more links appeared until they formed a cross on the side of the tomb. They say that anyone who touches the chain on the tombstone will die by the chain, just as the logger did. Sometimes the logger's ghost is seen rising from the graveyard at night, Francis added. His wife's curse has followed him beyond the grave, and he cannot rest as long as the chain remains upon his tombstone. It was not easy, but I managed to keep my face straight during their earnest recitation of the logger ghost story. I knew Jonathan and Francis truly believed in ghosts and curses and were trying to warn me out of the goodness of their hearts, but the whole thing made me want to laugh. Good, Tabitha. I took a long drink of water to restore myself. I thanked them gravely for the warning, and I assured them that I would visit the cemetery only during the daylight hours and would not go near the logger's grave. Then I excused myself from the table and waited until my bedroom door was firmly shut before I gave way to the mirth I'd been holding in during dinner. I'd meant to keep my promise to my cousins, truly, but business kept me over long in town the next day, and it was dusk before I turned my brand new Auburn 851 supercharged boat tail speedster toward my cousin's farm, located several miles out of town. The Auburn was a beautiful sports car, and it was a beautiful evening for a drive, so I put down the top and decided to take a detour to the cemetery to pay my respects to my great aunt, just like I'd promised Mother. I stopped by the side of the road, picked a nice bunch of wildflowers to lay on my great aunt's grave, and drove to Bond's Chapel. Time for my drink. An eerie twilight lay over the cemetery as I parked my car on the outskirts and picked up the impromptu bouquet. It was almost too dark to read the headstones, so I hurried back to the car and turned on the headlights, which made the shadows appear darker and more ominous. It was hard to see anything outside the lights, and my imagination populated the surrounding darkness with evil spirits full of dark menace. Hi, Deidre. It's very scary here. Very scary. Poppycock, I muttered to reassure myself. I was getting as fanciful as Jonathan and Francis. The temperature dropped dramatically as I entered the cemetery for the second time. The flowers in my hand drooped from the cold. Shivering, I told myself to buck up. I was letting my cousin's stories affect my imagination, but that didn't prevent me from walking rapidly up and down, scanning tombstones for my great aunt Celia. Just as I turned away from a crumbling obelisk, 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 marking the tomb of a man who died at the advanced age of 87, I saw a chain marking a gravestone a few yards away. It was a strange-looking object. It didn't look as if it had been put there at the behest of the family. No, the chain looked as if it had formed itself on the headstone. In fact, when I peered closer, I saw that there were two chains, one vertical and one horizontal, that formed the shape of a cross. Gooseflesh rose on my arms as I remembered the story of the logger. I took an involuntary step backward and almost screamed when I bumped into a tombstone behind me. It was pitch black all around me, except for the two bright headlights of the Auburn. The whole cemetery had gone silent. No chirping crickets, no soughing wind, no rustle of night creatures through the grass, no sound at all. I shuddered, and the flowers slipped out of my shaking hands. I decided it would be better to return in daylight to look for my great aunt's grave. I turned quickly around toward my car, forcing myself to saunter, even though I wanted to run. Suddenly, all the shadows disappeared in front of me in the blaze of white light. For a split second, I stared blankly at the huge, dark shadow cast by my own body. Then I whirled around and saw a white mist rising from the ground beneath the great gravestone with the chain on it. The mist glowed brighter than my headlights. It was forming into the figure of a man. I shrieked, spun back around, tripped over the small tombstone of a baby, righted myself, and sprinted for my car. ILMNW, an owl. The light behind me grew brighter, and the air around me grew so cold that my desperate, panting breaths turned to fog in front of my face as I ran. Fortunately for me, the top was down on my auburn, and I vaulted into the driver's seat without opening the door and got the car started on the first try. I turned the car around fast and raced away from the cemetery, darting a quick look back at the glowing figure hovering menacingly a few feet above the tombstones. I turned my head back around just in time to see a thick logger's chain hanging at head height between two trees. I shouted and ducked simultaneously, hitting the brakes. The chain ripped right through the windshield, bending the metal and shattering the window. The horses. Glass cascaded all over me as the car shuddered to a halt. I sat up, pop-eyed, and saw a glowing figure shooting toward me in the rearview mirror. I hit the gas and drove away as fast as I could, bleeding from numerous glass cuts on my scalp, neck, and back. The broken glass of the windshield shimmered around me like tiny stars in the fading light of the Phantom, which was left far behind. The drive home was a blur. One moment I was driving frantically away from a glowing figure, and the next minute I was parking beside my cousin's barn. I was a mess. My car was a mess. When my cousins heard the Austin roar into their yard, they came running out of the house with a lantern. When they saw the ruined car, they exclaimed in alarm. I stumbled out of the driver's seat and fell at Jonathan's feet. Frances started crying when she saw the blood trickling down my face and covering my clothes. Can you guys hear little Minnie in there making that same noise that Nana Patty's dog does? They hustled me into the house and wouldn't listen to a word until I was cleaned up and bandaged. To their credit, they did not chide me for not heeding their warning about the ghost. Frances clucked and sympathized, while Jonathan handed me a stiff brandy. Oh, East Coast, you guys are the spiritual hour. We'll take you to visit your aunt's grave tomorrow, Jonathan said, as I downed the drink in one gulp. I choked, sputtered, swallowed hard, and said, "No thanks. I'll let you represent Mother." I've had enough graveyards for one visit. I only wish I could get that Phantom to pay for the car repairs. Just be thankful you still have your head, Jonathan said dryly. If you had touched that gravestone, you probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to me. I stared at him wide-eyed. I'd forgotten about the curse on the gravestone. The fact that I hadn't touched the marker may very well have explained the miraculous way I turned just in time to see the logging chain and duck out of the way before it chopped through my windshield. I clutched at my neck and my stomach lurched unhappily. "Enough, Jonathan," Frances said. "Robert needs to rest." I sure did, It was bad enough to find out ghosts did exist. Even worse to have one try to kill me. I wasn't sure my nerves could take anything else. I got shakily to my feet and headed to my bedroom. This time I wasn't laughing, and I sure as heck wasn't going back to Bond's Chapel Cemetery. Okay, Moody's Light, we already read. That one was hilarious with all you guys in here. It was so much fun. This one is called Stiffy Green. This one's from Terre Haute, Indiana. Stiffy Green. The year I turned 7, porta potty. Both of my parents died in a carriage accident, and I moved in with my grandparents. Well, I'm glad you love it, Deidre. I have fun reading to you guys. I had been in my new home for only a week when I first visited the floral shop and met old Mr. Heinel. I had to step down as I entered the shop, which took me by surprise. I almost fell on my face, and while I regained my balance, the little bell jingled overhead, and the door swung wide. When I was more or less back on my feet, I looked around and stopped abruptly in amazement, my mouth dropping open. My nose was assailed by various floral scents, and an amazing array of colors met my eyes. I'd never seen so many flowers in one place before. Hi, Auntie Cuckoo. Behind me, Granddaddy chuckled and urged me forward as he closed the door behind us. I walked around, wide-eyed, exploring every aisle, touching a smooth petal here, sniffing a rose there. The place was full of bright flowers, as well as ferns and plants I'd never seen before. There were even a few small trees. At last, I came to the back of the store, where Granddaddy sat talking to a gregarious old man who was puffing on a pipe, and I spotted a big bulldog snoozing behind the counter. I love dogs, and I wanted to pet him, but I don't know. It didn't give a year. Robin. You're supposed to be watching the movie, Robin. The series. Hi, honey, hush. Did we tell her when she was in here before? Honey, hush. Robin Lane, will you remind Carolyn about that in case I forget to remind her about Honey Hush being blocked? Well, you were there, Robin. Okay, yeah, I'm sure she'll get it done, honey. Hush. Okay. Okay, let's see. I love dogs and wanted to pet him. It's been over a week. Yeah, she's been super busy with a lot of stuff. She never gets to the emails and everything. Mental note. Okay, Robin Lane is going to take a mental note to remind Carolyn in case I forget. Okay, honey hush, you're welcome. Let me even message her, even though she's probably sleeping by now. But she'll see it, hopefully. Honey hush. Honey hush. Asked to be unblocked. No telling when she'll look at this, honey hush. Okay? Sometimes she'll get back to me pretty quick, other times not so much. In fact, I don't think she's looked at any of my messages that I wrote yesterday. It's just saying they were delivered. Now this one's just sending. Okay. Mr. Heinel said that Stiffy Green didn't much like people, so I left him alone. To ease my disappointment, old Johnny Heinel gave me a peppermint to eat while he and Granddaddy talked. It was the first of many sweets I received from Mr. Heinel. As I rolled the peppermint around in my mouth, I studied the bulldog. Stiffy Green is a funny name, I thought, and so I asked Mr. Heinel about it. Chuckling, he said it was because the old bulldog walked with a stiff gait and had piercing green eyes. Huh? I said, not knowing what else to say. I held out my hand towards Stiffy Green. The bulldog raised his head, looked me up and down, and then came over to be stroked. He likes you, old John Heinel said in a surprise. And so he did. Stiffy Green was a rugged fellow who adored his master and didn't much care for anyone else. But from that day on, we were friends. Okay, honey hush, I sent her a message. She has tons of them. She tries, but yeah, she gets way behind. I don't know how she does it myself. Okay, let's see. And so he did. Stiffy Green was a rugged fellow who adored his master and didn't much care for anyone else. But from that day on, we were friends. He'd let me and my granddaddy pet him, which was quite an honor. We were practically the only people he tolerated aside from his master. Sometimes the old dog would consent to romp with me in the yard behind the floral shop. Granddaddy said Mr. Heinel would have been very lonely if he didn't have Stiffy Green. Mrs. Heinel had passed away several years before, and now the only one Mr. Heinel had to keep him company in his old rambling house was Stiffy Green. See, I lost my... The bulldog slept every night beside his master's bed, guarding him from harm. The two were inseparable. The old man and his bulldog loved to walk around town in the evenings after they closed up the floral shop. Mr. Heinel carried his walking stick and puffed on his pipe. It doesn't look too friendly there. While Stiffy Green trotted beside him, pausing here and there to sniff an interesting smell. Mr. Heinel would nod to folks and call out a greeting, and they would respond with a smile and wave. Everyone in town loved John Heinel, but few dared to approach the man when he was out walking with his dog. Stiffy Green greeted people with a glare and a growl, for he was very protective of his master. He put aside his gruff manner only when he passed my grandparents' house and saw me playing in the yard. Then he would trot over and romp with me while Granddaddy talked to Mr. Heinel. About a year after I moved to Terre Haute, old Mr. Heinel passed away in his sleep, with Stiffy Green on guard beside him. It was very sad. I went to the funeral with my grandparents, and we brought Stiffy Green with us. The big bulldog sat mournfully through the service and watched with us as his beloved master's casket was interred in the Heinel family mausoleum. After the gate around the mausoleum was locked, we took Stiffy Green over to John Heinel's cousin, who had agreed to give the aged bulldog a home. I hugged the big old dog fiercely, tears running down my cheeks. As we left the cemetery, I saw Stiffy Green trot back over to the fence surrounding the mausoleum, refusing to leave his master. I heard later that he had to tie him up. I heard later that they had to tie him up with a rope and drag him along to the cousin's house that night. But Stiffy Green wouldn't stay there. He'd gnaw and gnaw at the rope until it broke, and then he would gallop over to the cemetery to stand guard over his master's tomb. After several attempts to keep him at home, the cousin gave up, and Stiffy Green moved into the graveyard permanently. The staff made a shelter for him behind the mausoleum and fed him tidbits from their lunches. My grandma sent me over with food for my old canine friend several times a week. Stiffy Green was always happy to see me, but he would never stray far from John Heinel's tomb. As the months passed, Stiffy Green lived up to his name, and as his gait grew increasingly stiffer, his inclination to move steadily declined too. I knew he was ready to join his master. I know, yes. Me too, Deidre. The cemetery workers sent us word when Stiffy Green passed on. My grandfather and several of John Heinel's friends met to discuss what to do about his faithful companion. They decided his body should be stuffed and mounted and laid to rest in the mausoleum beside his master. I didn't favor the idea myself. It seemed a bit gruesome to me, but I didn't get a vote in the matter. It soon became a popular pastime for the children at my school to peek through the windows of the mausoleum to see Stiffy Green still on guard beside his master's body. I never went there, even when my buddies begged me to come along. I thought it would spoil my memory of the old bulldog. May I get a drink again? I have, yes, Davida, yes. LMNW. You're funny. One evening, about 2 months after Stiffy Green's death, I was walking home past the cemetery at dusk when I heard a dog barking inside the fence. My heart skipped a beat, for it sounded just like the bark. Ooh, this is giving me chills. Just like the bark Stiffy Green used to give when he saw me coming to play with him. I looked around, wondering if my grandparents had been mistaken and Stiffy Green were still alive. Then I saw the old bulldog barreling toward me among the gravestones. "Stiffy!" I shouted, running forward and swinging myself up and over the fence. I knelt to hug my buddy, and my arms went right through him. Gasping, I sat back as a translucent tongue tried to wash my face, and eager paws alighted on my shoulders. A cold, clammy mist seeped through my clothes where the ghost dog touched me as I stared into glowing green eyes as eager and young as a puppy's eyes, I couldn't be afraid. Someone whistled behind me. Stiffy Green shook himself, gave my cheek a final freezing cold lick, and trotted off. I whirled and saw old John Heinel strolling down the path leading to the mausoleum, pipe in one hand, walking stick in the other. He nodded and waved to me as Stiffy Green joined him, tail wagging. I waved back, my mouth open in shock. They both vanished as twilight stillness settled over the cemetery. I sat there for a long time, thinking about what I'd seen. Finally, I stood up and grinned. The ache I'd felt in my chest whenever I thought about John Heinel and Stiffy Green was gone, never to return. Something else happened, too. I reasoned that if old Mr. Heinel and his dog were still around, maybe my dead parents weren't far away either. With a lighter heart, I vaulted the cemetery fence and ran home to supper with my grandparents. Hi, Lisa and Nia. That was a good one. I like that one. This one is called OSSIAN. Yeah, it was a good one, wasn't it? Ossian? Ossian? Maybe Ossian? From Greencastle, Indiana. Teddy was bored. Oh, good, Steph, good. Glad you're loving it. Teddy was bored. He had a history exam tomorrow, but couldn't concentrate on his books. He'd been studying for days, and all the facts and figures swirling around in his brain no longer made any sense. In frustration, he slammed his books shut and piled them under his arm. A change of scene might help him concentrate. Teddy threw the history books into his rucksack and headed down the street to the campus library. Along the way, he nodded greetings to several acquaintances, ogled the pretty daughter of the dean, and spent a half hour commiserating with his fellow history students over the upcoming test. By the time he entered the library building, Teddy was feeling much better. He chose a spot near Governor James Whitcomb's rare book collection, which had been recently donated to the library, and settled there with his history books. He'd browsed the governor's collection a time or two and found some interesting reading material therein. Unfortunately, none of the books were eligible for circulation, so Teddy was forced to read them in his leisure time, which at the moment was non existent. Yeah, okay, Lisa Nia, you're busy. Glad you took a break to listen to us. Still, when history got overwhelming, he could relax a few minutes with the old books. Teddy spent the next few hours in ancient Rome, at least in his mind. By the time he was certain he had his Caesars straight, it was dark. Yawning, he stood up and stretched, and then he wandered over to the Whitcomb collection. He started reading a book from the collection last week. Which one was it? Oh, yes, the Poems of Ossian. I know I'm not saying that right. The librarian had recommended it to him, saying it was Governor Whitcomb's favorite. Teddy took it back to his table and started reading. He found the book, supposedly the English translation of an epic cycle of Scottish poems from the early Dark Ages, to be fascinating. The main character, Ossian, I'm going to go with Ossian, or Ossian, was a blind bard who sang of the thrilling life and battles of Fingal, a Scotch warrior. Teddy was about halfway through when the librarian who recommended the book to him came over to tell him the library was closing. Teddy was astonished. It couldn't be closing time yet. He wasn't finished with this book. Like the book? The librarian asked, seeing his eyes shining and faraway gaze. Teddy nodded enthusiastically. Make a note of the place where you left off so you can find it again tomorrow, she advised before setting off to warn a few more students about closing time. With a sigh, Teddy jotted down the page number in his writing tablet and closed the book. He piled his history text into his rucksack and paused, looking at ASEAN. He was halfway through. I'm sorry I keep pronouncing it one way and then the other. He could finish it tonight and return it first thing in the morning before his history exam. No one would notice if it was gone. It wasn't like stealing. He would only be borrowing the book overnight. In a flash, Teddy thrust ASEAN into his rucksack and quickly made his way out of the library. Behind him, a dark shadow that had lain sleeping peacefully among the tomes awakened and watched him go. Teddy jogged swiftly across campus, heading back to his boarding house, eager to get back to Ossian. Around him, the night air seethed with unseen energy, and the gas lamps lining the street flickered as he passed underneath them. He nodded a greeting to his landlady, who was lighting the lamps on the porch to welcome her lodgers home. She nodded back at him and picked up her broom, ready to attack the brown oak leaves that had drifted onto the porch during the bright fall day. Teddy raced upstairs, threw his rucksack on the bed, and pulled out the poems of Ossian. Lighting the oil lamp, he settled down in his favorite chair to read and read and read. The wind picked up as the night progressed, hissing against the windows and rattling the panes. Oh, Zion, it moaned against the shutters. No, Garnet. No, Mittens, no. No. Oh my gosh. She wanted to start ripping apart our tax papers. She loves to chew paper. She just rips it apart and spits it out. This is our taxes that I have to take in. It moans against the shutters of Teddy's second floor room. The wick of Teddy's lantern flickered wildly, making the shadows dance around the room. Teddy's eyes, glued to the pages of the book, barely noticed. A tree branch thudded against the side of the house in time to a sepulchral chant hissed among the pines lining the yard. Who stole Ossian. In the boarding house, Teddy turned another page of the book. Out on the front porch, the landlady swept the last of the autumn leaves from the steps and paused, shivering as she stared into the dark street. The wind tore through the branches of the large pine trees, edging the property, hissing, "Oh, Sion! Oh, Sion!" Hastily, the landlord took her broom and scuttled inside, slamming shut the front door and locking it. Along the empty street, a long shadow paced slowly beneath the glow of the street lamps, though there was no person there to cast it, at least no one visible. Thank you, Mariette Els. Thank you. I saw you replied to a comment of mine because it does notify me. And I wondered, I had never seen you. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much. That's very sweet. I'll be there shortly. The footsteps echoed in the chilly evening air, and an unspoken voice whispered in the wind, "Who stole Ossian? Who stole Ossian?" When the shadow reached the front of the apartment house, it stopped, and the wind rose around it, swirling brown oak leaves up into twin cyclones on either side of the walkway. "Ossian!" the wind howled. "Ossian!" The invisible shadow figure stared up at the lighted window above him. Through the pane, Teddy was clearly visible in his chair, eagerly turning the pages of the book. The shadow raised an arm and pointed toward the window. A pile of leaves upended itself and slammed against the side of the house in a whoosh of cold air. "Ossian!" the wind howled. Still, Teddy didn't move. Just then, two laughing students came striding down the road in high spirits, several bottles of whiskey clutched in their arms. The shadow melted into the ground, and the leaves drifted silently to earth as the students came barreling up the walkway and let themselves in the front door with the spare key. Lights came on inside the house, and friendly voices echoed up and down the hallways. A few minutes later, the boarders, a dreamy-eyed Teddy among them, came to the dining room to eat supper. The shadow drifted quietly into the darkness under the pine trees, biding its time. After dinner, the boarders made their way to their separate rooms, Teddy racing ahead of them all, eager to get back to his book. Slowly, the lights went out in each of the rooms, except the front room upstairs, where Teddy sat reading in his nightshirt, his nightcap askew over one eye, still mesmerized by Ossian. It was nearly midnight when Teddy turned the final pages of the poems of Ossian and shut the book with a satisfied sigh, his eyelids drooping. We're just getting started around here at midnight. He thought about going back to his history books, but a moment later, he nodded off in the chair. Ossian still clutched to his chest. As the big grandfather clock struck midnight in the hallway downstairs, the front door burst open, and a hurricane force winds blew colored leaves all around the entryway, bringing the chill of winter with them. A black shadow figure, darker than the surrounding night, stepped inside. "Ossian," it hissed. "Who stole Ossian?" Inside the downstairs rooms, the lodgers shivered and rolled deeper into their beds, but the shadow had no interest in them. It walked toward the stairs in a pit of darkness that sucked on the eye. Sion, it whispered as a shadow foot lifted to the footstep with, with the first step. With each thud of a footfall came a word of the agitated chant. Who thud, stole, thud, Sion, thud. Who thud, stole, thud, Sion, thud. At the top of the stairs, the shadow pointed to Teddy's door, blowing it open with a loud bang. Teddy woke with a start to see the silhouette of a black figure, all swirling energy and eyeball sucking darkness, standing in the doorway. The wick of the oil lamp beside the chair flickered wildly in the strange, airless breeze. The black figure strode toward the cowering student, looming taller and taller in the guttering light of the lamp. Its arm whipped out suddenly from the shadows surrounding it, and a bony finger pinched an inch from Teddy's nose. Who stole Sion? The shadow hissed. I only borrowed it, Teddy shrieked in terror. Then Teddy ducked under the skeletal arm of the shadow figure, jumped out of bed, and flung himself out the door, down the steps, and out of the house. Sion still clutched to his chest. Early the next morning, the librarian, whose job it was to unlock the front door of the library, found Teddy huddled on the doorstep with the poems of Sion gripped in trembling hands. I borrowed it from the restricted collection, he gasped when he saw the librarian. I'm sorry. Teddy thrust the book into the librarian's hands and ran away as if all the demons of hell were at his heels. Perhaps they were. Puzzled, the librarian stared after him for a moment before taking the book into the library to be shelved. In the shadows above a lintel, a dark figure smiled as the librarian slipped his favorite book back onto the shelf. Sion, it murmured, and then vanished. That one's kind of dumb. Lucky you, lovely sunny day in South Africa. That's wonderful. I would have just moved those a little bit. I'm seeing my shirt's a little bit low cut here tonight. Might be why these gentlemen callers keep coming in. This one's called The Lady in Black. This one's out of Morgan Monroe State Forest. Lex, can you turn that down a little? Right, Lisa? 23 degrees. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, though. So it's a little hot, though, Mariette. And I love your name, Mariette Els. Let me get a piece of my gum to keep my throat from getting all dry. Wonder why I can never get this stopped. Oh, wait, no, I better not do that. There we go. One moment, guys. again. The lady was so happy, ecstatically happy. She had married the man she loved, and now she had a child, a perfect baby girl. There was nothing more she wanted. She went about her daily task with a song in her heart and a smile on her lips for everyone she met. Perhaps she was too happy. Perhaps fate despised so great a joy when so many others were living in despair. Whatever the reason, it came as a body blow when her husband, her beloved helpmate, died in a quarry accident in the third year of their marriage. The lady was devastated. Her young husband was laid to rest in Step Cemetery, and she visited his grave every day, carrying their small daughter with her. 73. Oh, that's perfect, Marriott. Perfect weather. I can't wait till it warms up here. It's starting to get a little warmer, but we have still a couple of cold months coming. Right, Whisper? Her daughter became everything to the young widow. She guarded the child carefully when she was a toddler and was extremely strict with the girl when she went to school. Homework was always done on time. All visits with friends were supervised. Only activities that were educational in nature were permitted. Church was attended every week. Sorry. The situation grew worse as the girl grew older. She was a beauty, like her mother, and the boys flocked around her at school. But her mother was jealous of their attention. When other girls went to the local soda shop or the moving pictures with their beaux, the lady made her daughter stay at home and study. In her junior year, the daughter became obsessed with the prom. She wanted to go. She needed to go. Every other girl in her class was going. She would be ashamed to show her face in school if she didn't go. The teen spent the first 6 months of school begging her mother for this one treat, this one chance to be like all the other girls. Finally, she wore down her mother, who relented to her precious daughter going to the prom, only if she went with the neighbor's son, a trustworthy boy who attended their church. The daughter made a face when she heard the condition, but she agreed. Anything to go to the prom. Unbeknownst to the lady, this self-same boy had been secretly courting her lovely daughter for months. In the evening, when the daughter went up to her bedroom, ostensibly to study, she would creep down the tree outside her bedroom and visit her secret beau. On the night her mother told her daughter she could go to the prom, the young couple boldly went to the soda shop and ordered ice cream sundaes, just like the other high school sweethearts. They even held hands under the table. The daughter bought a wonderful, sparkly silver dress to wear to the prom. The neighbor boy picked her up right on time and presented her with a perfect corsage. The lady gave him a long lecture on correct behavior and her high expectations. She even hinted that the neighbor boy might be welcome again in their home if he behaved himself and brought her daughter home by 10 o'clock that night. He eagerly promised to have the daughter home by curfew, overjoyed at the possibility of being able to court her openly after the prom. The daughter and her date discussed it all the way to the high school, eagerly making plans for picnics and movie nights with their friends once the lady had sanctioned their courtship. At home, the lady fussed around the house and watched the clock, worrying lest something happened to her daughter. Would some boy accost her? Would someone spike the punch? Mittens, come on now. um, would she stuff herself on sweets and fall ill? Surely not. The neighbor's boy was a trustworthy lad. He would take care of her daughter. At the prom, the daughter and her beau danced and laughed and danced again. Around 9, he suggested they sneak off early and do some parking, like the other high school sweethearts. The daughter was ecstatic. She'd never been parking before. They went to the local lovers' lane by the cemetery, and as a light rain fell on the car, they held hands and made plans for their future. The boy even managed to sneak in a kiss or two before the girl coyly held him off and reminded him of his promise to her mother. Thus reminded of the strict old lady, the neighbor boy casually checked his watch and gasped in shock. It was 15 minutes to 10. There was not a minute to spare if he wanted to get his girl home before curfew. We must go. We must hurry, the daughter cried. Mother will never allow us to date again if we miss curfew. Her beau gunned the engine and raced down the winding, narrow road, accelerating on every straightaway. He must get her home on time. He must. The car fishtailed on the slippery, rain-slicked roads, and the boy fought for control as they rounded a corner. The daughter gasped and then sighed with relief as the wheels caught some traction and the car straightened out. Abruptly, the car spun out of control. Spinning once, twice, it slammed into a tree and shuddered to a halt. The boy smashed his head on the dashboard, dying on impact. Boy, this is a great story. The daughter flew through the shattered windshield, past the tree, and into the barbed wire fence in the nearby field. Her body was sliced into pieces by the cruel wire, and her head was lopped off at the neck. 10 o'clock passed, and then 11 o'clock, with no sign of the daughter or her beau. Frantic with worry, the lady and her neighbors drove around town looking for their missing children. When they saw the lights of a police car ahead of them, the lady gave a cry of great fear, knowing instinctively that her daughter was dead. She flew out of the car, brushing past the police officers and falling to her knees beside her daughter's decapitated form, weeping bitterly, while the neighbor couple clung together in agony, staring at the totaled car containing the body of their son. The two young people were buried in their families' plots in Step Cemetery. Somehow, life went on for the neighbors and for the deceased young sweethearts' high school friends. But it stopped for the lady. Her hair turned silver white overnight, and her face grew suddenly lined in gray. She made it through the burial, barely, and then collapsed. From then on, she dressed head to toe in black, ate infrequently, and rarely slept. She spent most nights sitting on a roughly carved tree stump in the cemetery, crying and talking to the graves of her lost husband and daughter. Time passed, but the lady's sorrow did not. Grim-faced and silent, she went about her tasks during the day and returned weeping to the graveyard each night. Finally, the lady's terrible grief drove her insane, and she was put in a mental institution where she died a few months later. A month to the day after the lady's death, one of her daughter's high school friends and her beau went parking in the lover's lane near the cemetery. They kissed and cuddled in the front seat of the big old car, and the girl gave a laughing shriek when a thump rocked the vehicle, thinking her boyfriend was teasing her. Her shriek turned into a scream when she saw a glowing, dark figure loom menacingly beside the car. Staring in the window was a silvered haired woman dressed all in black. Around her neck, she wore a tattered, blood stained human head, which she raised with her gnarled hands. She glared a warning through the windshield of the car. The girl and the boy both recognized the battered head as that of the woman's daughter, their dead friend from high school. The girl screamed and fainted as her boyfriend started the car with shaking hands and backed the car away from the glowing figure. He swung out onto the road with a hammering heart and squealing tires. Then, reminded of how the ghost's daughter had died, he slowed down as soon as the dark figure was out of sight and drove cautiously through the winding, narrow road until he reached his girlfriend's home. The courting couple was the first, but certainly not the last, to see the lady in black. Even after local high school students, fearing the wrath of the ghost, gave up gave up on the cemetery as a lover's lane, the lady in black continued to appear to folks brave enough to visit Stepp Cemetery. To this day, she can be seen walking through the graveyard, her long silver hair aglow against her black gown, and sometimes she sits on the old stump chair, weeping softly and talking to the tombs. It is, isn't it? Right? Yeah, it is. It is a tragic story. But I'm thinking, hey, it's folklore, okay? It's folklore. Let's see how long. Okay, it's been an hour. Okay, we'll read The Face from Bloomington, Indiana. Yeah, some of these are getting really tragic. Remember that one? Well, Moody, that was, yeah, that, Alicia, yeah, you guys all made that one funny, though, with all the horses. But he killed his whole family. he, this one's called The Face, like I said. Chapter 9. He toppled into love the moment he set eyes on the new transfer student in late August when classes started for the semester. She was an art major, and he was a poor medical student who didn't talk much about his family on account of his father. His father had gone insane in traffic one day and tried to run over several pedestrians who were blocking the street. His father had been locked away in an asylum, and the family never mentioned him. It was lovely meeting you too, Marriott Els. Thank you. Really appreciate it. But his father was not on his mind the day he met Sheila. She was a lovely girl with masses of long black hair and eyelashes so long they got tangled in her curls when she leaned over her desk. He had a withdrawn nature, though not by inclination. He'd learned the hard way that friends started acting funny when they learned about his insane father. So he stopped having friends. If anyone inquired about his family, he told them his father was dead rather than admit the truth. Now he had to overcome his taciturn nature or risk losing Sheila to one of the other fellows who panted after her. He studied her habits as closely as she studied her books, and soon he found a way to be close to her. She had a favorite spot in the library where she always studied between classes. He started studying in a cubicle nearby, and a couple of quote unquote chance encounters between them turned into a conversation. Then he volunteered to tutor her in one of her classes. From there, it was easy. Sheila toppled into love with him too, almost as madly as he had fallen for her. The new college sweethearts went everywhere together, hardly bearing to part for classes. He lived in a bubble of joy until the Tuesday he saw her leaving her history class next to a good-looking fellow who lived in the same dorm. They were laughing together over something the professor had said in class, and a shaft of sheer jealousy pierced his gut. How dare she laugh with another man? Thank you, Mariette. Thank you so much. Come back, please. The boyfriend confronted his wayward girlfriend with her perceived trespass, and she stared at him incredulously. You're crazy, she said. He winced, reminded of his father. That set him off. He started yelling at her, accusing her of all sorts of things, and she stalked off in a rage. He huddled in his dorm room, feeling miserable and vowing to forget her. But they made up over dinner, and things were fine for a while. But one day, the boyfriend saw her borrowing a pen from a handsome blonde fellow at the library. That set him off again. The two young lovers hissed angry words at each other until the librarian kicked them out. Again, Sheila stalked off in a rage as he shouted nasty things at her retreating back. Again, he huddled on the narrow bed in his dorm room, feeling miserable and vowing to forget her until the black anger gave way to common sense. He called Sheila and apologized. She accepted his apology, and they agreed to get back together. In a flush of excited relief, he asked her to the dance on Friday, and she accepted. Ooh. I won't show this picture yet. Well, this drawing. The boyfriend's hands trembled with excitement as he packed his medical bag after class on Friday. He rushed back to the dorm, threw his bag on the desk, and dressed in his best. He picked Sheila up at her dorm room and escorted her to the dance. It was a wonderful night. Sheila had bought a new yellow dress, a lovely concoction with a swirling skirt and a little bit of a top. She looked stunning. The boyfriend's head whirled at the sight of her, and he could hardly keep his hands away from her. They danced, drank, and ate appetizers until Sheila called a laughing halt to the eating, saying she'd gained 10 pounds in the last 10 minutes. He laughed along with her and told her they would dance it off, which they did. They left early and walked hand in hand back to his dorm room for a nightcap. When they reached the entrance to the dorm, Sheila veered off for a moment to speak with a red-haired fellow who was in one of her art classes, wanting to know about an assignment that was due the next day. The boyfriend stood impatiently just inside the door, frowning as the art student beamed at Sheila in the gorgeous little yellow dress. When she smiled back at him, the red-haired art student looked stunned. The inside of the boyfriend's skull throbbed from a sudden headache, brought on by too much alcohol, combined with gut-gnawing jealousy. When Sheila rejoined him, he grabbed her hand roughly and hustled her upstairs to his room. Stop rushing! You're hurting my hand, Sheila protested as he swept them both inside. A quick glance told him that his roommate was out. Good. He rounded on Sheila and shouted, You are hurting my heart. You flirt with every man you meet, you tramp. No, it's not going to end well, is it, Lisa? Mia. Sheila's face flushed scarlet with fury, and she shouted back at him, accusing him of flirting with the female medical students and of being so jealous she couldn't ask a 70-year-old man for directions without setting him off. "You were crazy," she shouted at him. "Stark raving mad." The boyfriend saw red. It rose around the edges of his eyesight, billowing like clouds. He groped through the red mists, and his hands found his medical bag. "Don't call me mad," he said through gritted teeth, and his hands closed on a scalpel. When the mist cleared from his eyes, Sheila lay dead at his feet, her throat cut from ear to ear. The whole room was covered with red gore, and her masses of black hair lay in a pool of streaming blood. It had been a silent murder. Sheila hadn't believed her eyes until it was too late to scream, too late to do anything but die. The boyfriend had cut her windpipe with medical precision, though he didn't remember anything that happened after the red mist had obscured his eyesight. His brain went into overdrive. Hide the body, clean up the blood, invent an alibi. But first, he stared at the face he loved so much. Dead now, gone out of his reach. The red mist rose a little in his mind as he knelt beside the body and slowly cut off her face. "Right, Steph?" "Yes." He wrapped the face carefully in plastic before putting it in his desk drawer. Then he cleaned up the blood, tucked the body into a blanket, and stuck it under his bed until the middle of the night, when he carried it downstairs and hid it in the tunnel near the laundry room. I'll just show you the drawing that I saw. I know, right? These stories in here get gory, don't they? And to think these are old tales from Indiana people. I have to get some from the other states too. The next day, the boyfriend told his roommate that he and Sheila had broken up and she had gone home in a snit without finishing her classes. He patted his desk drawer absently as he spoke. Once his roommate turned back to his books, he peered at the face inside. Yes, Sheila was still there. Right? I know. Right. I'm surprised she didn't. The face seemed to draw him, just as Sheila's presence had once done. The boyfriend kept wandering over to the desk to peer inside several times an hour. His roommate sat studying on the other bed and didn't seem to notice his restlessness, which was just as well. He had to get a grip on himself, start studying for final exams. Finally, the boyfriend went to the vending machine to buy a soda. When he got back, his roommate was leaning out the open window looking ill. "I think I have the flu," the roommate said when he came in. "Want me to take a look?" the boyfriend offered, reaching for his medical bag. His roommate turned white and barked, "No, thank you, don't bother. I'll just pick up something at the pharmacy." At that, he hurried out of the room, practically running. The boyfriend settled down at the desk, peered in the drawer at the face, and then began working on a paper he had due next week. He could feel Sheila's presence beside him. She was helping him with his homework, he thought happily. Downstairs, his roommate was on the phone with the police. The boyfriend went ballistic when the police came with a warrant to arrest him. They manhandled him out of his chair and over to the door. A grim-faced officer took a look in the desk drawer and then turned around and vomited on the floor. The boyfriend roared at the sacrilege. No other man was allowed to look at his girlfriend's face. It belonged to him. How dare they? He screamed all the way down the stairs and out of the dorm. Students peered out their dorms as he fought the hold of the policeman lunging this way and that in his fury. When the boyfriend realized they were leaving Sheila's face behind in the dorm, where any man might see it, he panicked. "Don't take her away from me," he pleaded with the officer as the man bundled him into the car. "I want her with me always. Don't take her away." He reached his handcuffed arms toward the man, who backed away and slammed the door on him. The boyfriend lay back against the seat and sobbed in misery. "Sheila, Sheila, Sheila." His family had him transferred to the asylum, where his father was kept locked up in a padded room. Every day, his enraged father tried to kill his attendants, while the bereft boyfriend wept and stared out the window. The boyfriend kept seeing Sheila's lovely face in the branches of a nearby tree. The face seemed to sway in rhythm to his father's fists, pounding on the walls in the room next door to his son. And in the dorm, the amorphous ghost of a young girl in a blood-stained yellow dress floats along the hallways, looking for her face. Now that's kind of creepy. Isn't it creepy? I like that. This isn't going to end well. I know. Oh, see how long this next one is. Oh, I know we read about this one in the Haunted Gary book, right, Whisper? I'll read this other one here, number 10. I'll wait for the one from that one about the train wreck. That's the next one after this. I'll be doing that too, Steph. Yeah. This is just something different right now. But yeah, I have that too, Steph. Reminisce. And good old days. I have some new ones that just came. I'm subscribed. Okay, I'll read this last one right for now. Counterfeit, Chapter 10, Leavenworth. In hindsight, I probably should have questioned my new employees more thoroughly before hiring them to excavate trenches through the tight crawl spaces in my newly purchased cave. But I was eager to create an easy path that would allow visitors to walk through the amazing caverns without the need to crawl through the narrow passages, and the local contractors didn't favor back-breaking work in dark cave. Ooh, I've been to some of those caves down here in Indiana, southern Indiana. So, I can't, I get so claustrophobic. You see some passages that are so small that some people will go into. It's crazy. No freaking way. Hi, Mary. So I welcomed the three men who came in answer to my sign and hired them at once, even though they requested nighttime working hours. It was a strange request. When I questioned them about it, they gave me evasive answers, which made me rather suspicious. Still, I needed the work done, and no one else had applied for the job, so I consented to their strange stipulation. I didn't see my new employees at all the first week, except on Friday morning when they came for their money. However, an expedition to the cave showed me that the excavation was moving forward. Expedition to the cave showed me that the excavation was moving forward as planned. They were working hard, and already some of the tighter passages had been enlarged enough to walk through. Very good. Here's a drawing. Did you? Fort Wayne? That's way, way far away from me, but yeah, I know where it is. Been down that way. A few more weeks passed in this manner. Then one of my tour guides popped in to see me after his shift. He'd gone exploring in some of the back passages that were closed to visitors and found a large crate in an otherwise empty cavern room. A crate? I exclaimed. What in tarnation is a crate doing in a back room of my cave? Sir, I don't know, the man replied. I thought I should report it. Yes, yes, well done, I said. I'll look into it at once. I thanked the man and sent him home to his dinner. As soon as time permitted, I took a lantern and descended along the passages until I reached the room in question. In the flickering lantern light, I saw a large crate standing on the floor of the cavern. What the devil? I inspected the box, which had no writing on it. I opened the lid. The glow of the lantern fell upon a strange contraption of some sort. I poked at it cautiously. It looked like a printing press. Then I saw the plates inside the machine and realized I was looking at an engraving of U.S. currency. Counterfeiters, I gasped aloud. Why had counterfeiters hidden their printing press in my cave? When? Who? Could it be one of the tour guides? No, I knew all of them well. Were some of the locals using my cave for their illegal activity? How had they gotten in? Then I remembered my new hires, the men who were excavating the tunnels, the men who only worked at night. Now I knew the reason for their strange hours. I had to report it at once. If I let it go on without turning them in, I ran the risk of being implicated in their counterfeiting operation. I saddled up my horse and rode into Leavenworth to speak to the sheriff. He was skeptical at first. Rural Indiana didn't seem like a likely place to run a counterfeiting operation, but a trip to the cave convinced him, and we made plans to ambush the counterfeiters the very next morning, which was Friday, when I went to the entrance of the cave to give them their pay. Dawn was coloring the sky when I strolled toward the cave with the counterfeiters' pay envelopes in the pocket of my jacket. The sheriff and his men were hidden near the entrance to the cavern, just as we'd planned. I could see them, but the counterfeiters emerging from the dark cavern would not until it was too late. Excuse me, my bubbly water. I stood waiting in the chilly morning air, keeping myself calm by reciting the timetables in my head. Suddenly, I heard voices echoing from the cave entrance. Then lights appeared in the darkness, like bobbing stars. A moment later, 3 men emerged, grubby from a night's hard work and blinking in the growing light of day. The deputies came running from either side of the entrance, shouting to the criminals to stop and put up their hands. The deputies managed to get the jump on 2 of the men, but the third, walking a couple of steps behind his friends, whirled and ran back into the cave. After him, shouted the sheriff, gesturing to several of his deputies to light torches, while others secured the 2 prisoners. I watched them follow the counterfeiter into the cave and waited anxiously for their return. A long time later, the sheriff and his men stumbled from the entrance, empty-handed. We paused at intervals to listen for the sound of footsteps, the sheriff told me. The torches cast so many shadows that it was hard to see into every cranny of every room. That place place is a maze. By the time we reached the mountain room, the footsteps had died away. We figured he'd doubled back to the entrance, but nobody saw him on the way out. The darn fellows got clean away. He won't get far without food or water, I told the sheriff. He must come out sooner or later. True, he conceded. So he set a guard upon the entrance and took his remaining prisoners back to Leavenworth. Days passed, and then weeks. By the end of the third week, the sheriff decided that the counterfeiter must have gotten lost in one of the uncharted tunnels and perished. Or perhaps he caused an avalanche in the mountain room, a deputy suggested. He could have been buried underneath all that rubble, and how would we know? That being entirely possible, the watch was abandoned and things returned to normal. Tourists came to visit the cavern. I got on with my work, and the remaining counterfeiters were taken before a judge and sentenced accordingly. Still, I shouldn't have been surprised when one of my tour guides began reporting that the shadowy figure of a man sometimes appeared in the mountain room, wandering around the perimeter of the space as if searching for a way out. He wasn't one of the tourists, and he vanished whenever a guide stepped toward him. Sometimes cave visitors reported that they felt someone was following them along the excavated passages, but when they turned around, no one was there. I was afraid stories about the ghost would discourage the tourist trade, but that never happened. In fact, I think some people visited the cave just to hear about the counterfeiter's ghost. I myself never saw the ghost, but I heard it once, a few years ago, a few years after the counterfeiter disappeared in the cave. I was standing in the mountain room after hours, inspecting a repair, when I heard a man's voice shouting for help deep inside the cavern. Technically, I was the only person inside the cave at the time of day. Still, I figured one of the tour guides might be doing some exploring and gotten himself turned around. I followed the voice for a few minutes, determined to rescue whoever was trapped in the cave. As I walked through the passageways, the voice changed direction several times, jumping from spot to spot faster than a human could run. I suddenly realized that I did not hear any footsteps save my own. That gave me goosebumps. I followed the voice around in a complete circle, finally returning to the mountain room, where I'd first heard the man calling. By then, the strangeness of the situation was getting to me. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and icy shudders crept across my skin. It must be the counterfeiter's ghost, I said aloud. I was answered instantly. Help me, the voice wailed suddenly right in front of me. I froze in fear. The sound came from the rubble at the foot of the mountain. I raised my lantern, but no one appeared in the flickering light. Trembling, I said, "Rest in peace, my friend. Rest in peace." Suddenly, silence fell over the room, and suddenly my fear went away. The ghost was gone. It was hard to go into the cave the next day, but I did it. I had to. I owned the place. To my relief, no shadow lurked in the mountain room, and the only voices I heard were those of tourists. "Tell me about the ghost," one little boy demanded excitedly, tugging on the hand of the tour guide. I didn't stay to listen. I had work to do. So, that one story was creepy. Actually, two of them. One about the couple, the widow, her daughter, and then a guy cutting off the... Ugh. So, I guess that'll be it for now. I'm getting really sleepy. I hope you guys can sleep well. Very creepy, right? Yes. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it coming to listen. I really enjoyed reading to you guys. I'm glad you guys like it. A head necklace, yes. I just started. Another little blankie. Till morning. No, Steph. I'll be falling asleep here, lady. I don't got no more energy. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming. Love y'all. Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye. Hi, Kathy from Texas. Bye, Kathy from Texas. Bye, Lisa H. Hi, Purple Minion Star. Good night. Thank you, Boo. Love you guys. Bye.